There we go.
There you go.
What would we do without you, Bob? My name is John. I'm alcoholic. In the few minutes that I have left, I hope that I can. I'm just kidding. I was trying to think of something, quick and sarcastic to say about our host, my host, but I just met him 5 minutes ago, so I can't speak much to his host duties. I've heard he has potentials, but I have not experienced them yet. I'm a little worried though after that joke. I'm really grateful to be here. Linda, thank you for your service, and to the committee for your service. I love these AA things. I love conventions and roundups and conferences. I particularly have a fond spot for men's retreats. Nothing like getting 30 men alone in the woods without their telephones. I love that. Easy, Linda. I used to go to these things, and I'm embarrassed. You'll soon find out that I'm an idiot, so I'll just tell you right about it. I'm so embarrassed. I used to go to these things, and I would look at the pamphlet and be like, oh, so-and-so's talk. I don't like him. And then, oh, Harold's talking. I'm going to go, or whoever it is. And, I'd go expecting to find some, major nugget or something that, I was missing that's keeping me from the next plateau of spiritual greatness or something like that. And, quite often I would leave, kind of empty-handed. So I thought, and because I was going with the wrong motive, the wrong idea. What makes these things magical is what happens between the speakers. When you're kind of removed from our regular life, when we're spending a long weekend with somebody, maybe it's Sunday morning, someone finally gets the courage to say on the way home, hey, I need to talk to you, Or maybe it's the guy sitting in the corner, guy or gal sitting in the corner that, got dragged here from their sponsor. Anybody get dragged here by your sponsor? We got one. The guy is sitting in the corner pretending to be on his phone with some life-threatening TikTok message, and, it's grabbing that guy or gal and saying, come on, we're going to go eat. We're going to go do whatever we do here, have some crab cakes. And that's what makes these things magical. And so I'm excited to be a part of it. I am breaking the cardinal rule. I was taught when you get to go to these things, you participate in all of it. It's been a wild week in my life. So I was born in Maryland. I spent the first 50 years here. I moved to Nashville 2 years ago, and so it's been a really a wild week for me. But tomorrow morning I'm going to one of my original road dogs in the program passed with 36 years of sobriety, and he was kind enough to do it, and have the funeral while I'm in town. And so tomorrow morning we're going to scoot up to the funeral, and I'm going to miss Harold's talk, but I know that'll be great. But I just need to say this to get kind of current, to make sure I'm in the right room. It's been a wild, wild week. I spent Monday and Tuesday in the hospital. My wife was not fond of my blood pressure being 186 over 110. So a couple of days in the hospital there, and then, all week I've been so excited to come see, because like I said, I lived in Frederick forever, and I sponsor a bunch of guys, but the excitement of coming to see all my guys, and my wife came with me. She's not here. She's at a women's retreat in West Virginia, so we had this big AA party in Frederick last night, which was beautiful, and the sadness of going to my friend's funeral, and then the excitedness of being here, and then 15 minutes before I came down, I got a call. My wife and I are the primary caregivers of my mother, who's 86 with awful dementia and Parkinson's, and they're taking her to the psych ward to be admitted for a few weeks. They can't get her meds straight. They're not fond of her wandering the rooms in her diaper at 3 a.m. and knocking on doors and waking people up. Sounds a lot like my drinking, but so they're gonna, so it's just been all over the place this week, and but I got to settle down, last night after being with us. I had 4 or 5 guys I sponsor at dinner. My wife did the same, and a bunch of us, 20 of us at this Thai restaurant, just doing what we do in AA. My sponsor says a lot, before your home group, close your eyes and listen to the music of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can hear the chatter and the laughter and hopefully a little bit of crying too, and maybe a little cussing and fighting, and you're in the right place. And my home group has that chatter, and so I'm excited to be here. I've been tasked with this 1, 2, and 3, and I love telling my story because it's just you can kind of surrender and let God in, and just whatever comes out is kind of God's fault. But when you have a topic, you got to kind of stay close. I can't start talking about 8 and 9 right off the bat. I got to stay close, and so you got to engage the brain a little bit, and so that's always been tough for me to do, to find that balance of just letting God take over completely and using the brain too much. But what really got me in a really good place was this Al-Anon meeting this afternoon at 5 o'clock. It was strong. There was like 100 women down there. Well, 90 women and about 10 men. But it was fantastic. I learned. I've been to a bunch of Al-Anon, these things, and I learned something today that I didn't know was possible. My new friend Marilyn was down there, and she, is a little bit farther on the path than I am in life, and she said that she had finally surrendered the fact that God didn't want her to have a partner or a spouse or mate, whatever it was, at that phase in her life. And but her friend in the program had passed, and she inherited her husband. And that was exactly what she said. You guys are laughing because you were there, and I didn't know that was possible. And so I was walking up in the elevator, and I'm thinking, my wife's 32 years sober, and I'm thinking, if she passes, who in the hell is she going to leave me to? And I start going through her sponsees, and I'm like, Marianne, no, not Marianne. Tara, no, that won't work. I'm going through this. I'm like, she's crazy. So it's and I love having an AA home. One of the awesome parts about this weekend for me is my two of my kids live in Nashville, and our grandbaby. That's how we wound up there. But I have a daughter here still in Maryland, in Frederick, and so it's just a blessing to spend the weekend with her. She's a 7-year black belt Al-Anon, 4th degree, I think, is the ranking. But it's weird having a child in Al-Anon. When she first told us that she was going to Al-Anon, I kind of did the math. I'm like, well, I'm 34 years sober, and my wife's 32 years sober, and she's only 30. So I'm like, well, she's never seen us drink, and use, and so. And I looked at my wife, and I was like, you must need to work the steps again or something, because your dry drunkenness has caused her to go to Al-Anon. But I didn't say any of that. I thought that. I thought that. I have learned, but it's really cool getting to do this together. She's actually my first love is my daughter Brenna. You say, well, how does that work? Because you were married, but when I met my wife, she had already had Brenna, and so we fell in love first, and later got to adopt her. And she's been one of the best things that ever happened to me. So that's it's kind of a joke in our family, but it's really the truth. She's my first love. I love the AA deal. I love the AA family. We have an AA home. Our house is always full of newcomers. When we lived in Frederick, there wasn't a day that went by there wasn't a man or woman there with a book, doing some stuff. And, my kids weren't really fond of that all the time, but, it was a cool childhood for them. When we'd say to my son, like, hey, what do you want to do for your birthday? And he'd rattle off, like, all the crazy AA names that we give each other. He's like, oh, I want Plumber Steve at my birthday, and Mark the oncologist. Let's get him, and so like our kids' AA birthday parties would be, like 2 normal people and like 30 drunks and a 4-year-old, and they loved it, man. They loved it, it's definitely God's house, and I got to see the strength of what Alcoholics Anonymous is. When I went to the so we moved down there almost 2 years ago, and I was lucky. My sponsor already lives there, and I have some AA friends that live in Nashville. And so I really, I didn't dive in like, we should when someone was talking about moving to a new town, right? Like moving to a new town can be really hard on an AA member, whether you're 1 year sober or 30 years sober, it can be tough. And, but I had stacked the deck. I was going where I had people. So I didn't really dive in, I didn't find a new home group. I didn't get involved in the prison right away. I just did a lot of fishing, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, but my wife dove right in, and we got involved, and we were part of this home group starting up that's been awesome. But where I'm going with all this is that, that community has been created again for us, which I didn't think was possible. I wound up at this little kind of mini hospital they have, just to see what was going on. And as soon as I got there, they're like, "Oh, you're going to the big boy hospital. We're going to get you an ambulance." And by the time the ambulance got to the real hospital, where they treat like humans, not just farm animals, there was a bunch of AAs in the parking lot waiting for my wife. And that's what we do. And I'm honored to be a part of that, and honored to get to share some of my experience, strength, and hope. I didn't give my sobriety date yet. It's July 5th, 1989. That was not the plan when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a few months shy of 18 years old. I didn't sit back and say, "Oh man, I'm really excited. In 34 years, I'm going to be sitting in Annapolis, with a bunch of, old people," right? I mean, that's, I was so, everybody was old when I got here. You know what I mean? It was like an AARP meeting. And it really, my sponsor was, I'm going to get to that, but he was ancient. And, but actually, the first guy that I asked to be my sponsor is here this weekend. And I use that terminology, asked to be my sponsors, because it's, for our new friends, it's different than having a sponsor. I asked him to be my sponsor, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think he probably told me, "Hey, I work 9 to 5, call me at, 5:30. And so I would call him at 4:50 a few times. And then after a few times he never answered. And I'd be like, "Oh, well, that doesn't work." But, he's here, so that's really cool. In running through our first 3 steps, I believe I was born with this disease. I was born restless, irritable, and discontent. The only thing that hadn't happened quite yet was the addition of alcohol. That allergy had not been ignited yet. And fortunately, it only took 11 years to get ignited, because if I hadn't found alcohol and its fun running mates, I'm telling you, I'd have killed myself by the time I was 13 or 14 or 15. I'm not making light of suicide, but that's how uncomfortable I was in my own skin. And alcohol is the only thing that fixed that. I do not have, sitting here today, I do not have an alcohol problem. I do not have a drug problem sitting here. I didn't when I got here. It looked like that, but I did not, Alcohol was my solution. It fixed that thing inside of me that was so broken that there was nothing else that could fix it, I grew up in an alcoholic home. My mother should have been in Al-Anon. So I got away with a lot of stuff for a long time because I was the 4th kid. And by the time my mother got to, when I got to my teenage years, she was done raising kids. The other 4 were gone, and the goal was keep John alive. That was it. She's paying all the bills. She's dealing with my alcoholic father. She's paying all the bills, and she's trying to keep him alive, and that didn't work. My father died of this disease. My grandfather died of this disease. So it's kind of a family tradition in our home. That's what we do. But I remember that first introduction to alcohol. There was some alcohol in my life before my first drunk, and I remember that first drunk like it was yesterday. But there were some times before that as a young kid. My dad used to own some bars, and there was always alcohol in the home. And I would do the typical Saturday morning. There might have been a few people over drinking or something, and I would go down and play that beer can roulette. You shake that beer can. Is there a cigarette butt? I don't know. Cigarette butt? No, cigarette. All right. Well, you just throw it back and you hope for the best. And so I did a little bit of that, but I wasn't. The magic did not happen yet. And I could not get through a day of school. Whatever ADD, ADHD, whatever, how many letters you got, that's what I had. I mean, like 7 minutes into a 50-minute class, I'm dying. It was really mental torture. I can't tell you that enough, And so I faked sick a lot, I had this fond likeness for the old chloroseptic. Everybody remember the chloroseptic? It came in red and green, and you could start a forest fire with it if you smoked at the same time. But I'd be like 8 or 9 or 10 or something, and my mom's going off to work. She's doing this manual labor job, and I'd be like, I'm sick. I can't go to school. And she'd be like, you don't look sick. And I'd say, no, I'm sick. And she said, let me take your temperature, and she'd give me the thermometer, and then she'd leave the room, and while she left the room, I'd put it on the light bulb. She'd come back, and I'd put it in my mouth, and she'd be like, Jesus Christ, you have a temperature of 150, we got to get you to the emergency room. And so you got to be really careful how you time that, And I'd stay home and have fun with the chloroseptic, but my first intentional drunk, is there a humming? Okay. I thought, did I take my medication this morning? My first intentional drunk was at my sister's wedding. I told you I'm the youngest of 4, which was unfortunate for them. My mom's job that day was to keep my father, the town alcoholic, from ruining the wedding. And little did she know, young Johnny was going to really make his debut into alcoholism. And that day, I got out of my mind drunk. Blackout, throw up, pee your pants, just do your best to ruin the event drunk. And thankfully, they're still married today, so I don't owe much of an amends for that. But what I remember so much about that, because I blacked out that very first time. I didn't know it was a blackout. I've later learned, that that's what that was. When I started drinking regularly right after that, I thought that was the goal, right? Blackout is the goal. I thought I had a gift for time travel, but, that was the goal. I had to get out of this reality that was my life. And my life, a friend of mine said earlier, if we all put our problems on the table and walked away and came back and got to pick someone, the problems, we'd all pretty much take our own, So I'm not paying the poor John story, but the next morning after this wedding, the conversation got to be my behavior the night before, and I had this old nasty aunt, and she said, I bet he'll never do that again. They're talking about how sick I was. And I remember thinking, oh no, let's do it right now. Right? Let's do it right now. And, people talk about, my sponsor tells us, about getting, being a better dancer and taller and better looking and all this stuff. And that didn't happen to me. I just got from the -10 inside to 0. I got back to level playing field. And I was good with that. And it didn't take long until my disease really took off, man. It was just out of control. There was always unaccounted for alcohol at my home. I didn't have to pay a wino to get, $2.19 to get a bottle of Mad Dog 2020, right? I did not have to, I might tell you, I've done it, but I didn't have to do it all the time. I could go down to my basement and get, yes, there was a time that Mad Dog was $2.19. I could get whatever I wanted, and no one was paying attention. I grew up in Montgomery County in the 1980s, and, they were not going to have some failure kid on their record. They just kept pushing me on to the next grade. If I was alive and showed up the first day of school, they would just put me in the next grade, right? Oh, he's alive, great, put him on, no tests, no reports, I didn't do anything. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, when I darkened your door, the last book I had read, this is true, was Curious George Goes to the Circus. That was my reading level. I didn't know anything. And I'll quickly tell you, and I think it's okay to briefly talk about, I found drugs at 13 or 14 years old, and it just microwaved my disease. It got me here faster. It got me tougher consequences that I might not have gotten. I never had a driver's license. I never had a car. So, getting, 7 DWIs was tough to do. Although I did get my first, DUI when I was 14 down in Ocean City. But that was someone else's fault. So it was a bunch of bad breaks and misunderstandings. But I did have some bad breaks with the police department. I got arrested by the same cop with the same buddies in the same car on the same street 3 times in like a 6-week period of time, and it was pathetic. But I was so full flight from reality. So I love joking, like, oh, it's someone else's fault. Like, it was this cop's fault. Like, I knew the cop that pulled us over was African American, and I knew he was reverse racial profiling us. I mean, I don't, like, I can pass a lie detector test on that, right? I could not fathom that the reason why he pulled us over was that we're driving around this 1972 Datsun B210 that was about 6 different colors. It had Grateful Dead stickers all over the back, and smoke was pouring out of each side like the Cheech and Chong mobile. That's not why he pulled us over. He was pulling us over because we were well-to-do white kids. I believe that. That was, as the popular saying these days, that was my truth, right? The truth was, I was full flight from reality, as our book talks about. And so when I got here, I got sent to this 6-month treatment program that I zipped right through in 16 months, and then that's true. You'll see, I'm a slow learner. The last 34 years will tell you I'm a slow learner. And I knew I was an alcoholic. I knew, like, I didn't need to be convinced. I mean, my mom would take me to these they didn't have, like, juvenile IOP back in the day, but my mom would take me to these do-gooders, and they would, like, answer all these questions, and, like, I would just answer. I said, all right, I know I can't answer them all dishonestly because, I've been arrested a dozen times, so I got to have some truth here, so I'll answer every other one honestly. It's like 20 questions or something, and halfway through I'm, batting 50%, which is really 100%, so I knew I was an alcoholic, but I got sober in this AA club, and they weren't doing a lot of book work. It was don't drink, stay sober, go to a lot of meetings, help the next drunk. It was a lot of fellowship AA. And I'm not saying that in a critical fashion by any means. All right. It went off, right? There's a lot of guys from that club that are still sober today. The guy Steve I was telling you about is one of them. Dancing John is here. He's still sober. So, but sooner or later we got to do some work. But, like, I didn't have our book definition of alcoholism, right? I knew that I couldn't drink. There was no ever this point of lying to myself about it. I didn't relate to all the book talked about. Bill talks about all these different experiences and trying to quit. That was not my experience. At 17 years old, you don't try to quit, right? I mean, I made the decision the first time when I had the right mixture of chemicals. I'm going to spend the rest of my life like this. I do not care what the cost is. And that's the way it was. And so I've been physically sober since July 5th of 1989, but my emotional sobriety has been one of like a cardiac care unit, like graph on the screen. I mean, just ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. And finally, those ups and downs leveled off when I found our book and somebody took me through this book and told me that it was an instruction manual. And I mean, again, I'm not being critical. That's just the way it was in that AA community. There was not this technical, almost institutionalized method of going through the book. I mean, I don't know if it was because the 12 and 12 was popular those days or what it was. I mean, we talked about the steps, and when the crisis of the day would come up, we'd apply a step to it, That was kind of my MO, And so I hope I can share with you a little bit about what my early 1, 2, and 3 was like, and kind of like in the middle of my sobriety, what 1, 2, and 3 was like, and what it's like today. But the first step was never an issue for me. When I sponsor a guy today, I give him our book, and we might read it together or different chapters together at the very beginning, or sometimes I might say, just go and read this book. And I ask him to read the doctor's opinion in the first 3 chapters. And I say, come back and we're going to talk. That's not my method. That's in the back of the book and working with others. Bill says, hey, when you meet this prospect, talk with him a little bit and give him the book and then meet with him again and see if he's interested. And that's basically what I'm talking about. But I ask him to, find the doctor's opinion and in Bill's story and there's a solution and more about alcoholism, find yourself, right? Doesn't matter whether I think you're an alcoholic. Doesn't matter if my mother thinks I'm an alcoholic. Doesn't matter what the judge thinks. It matters if I'm willing to concede to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic after reading that. But I didn't have that experience, And the difference in those two things to me was dramatic. I as I kind of briefly described the trajectory of my recovery for a long time, that's what the steps were for a long time, were kind of this crisis management tool. At 18 years old, 19 years old when I get out of that program, it was impossible to convince this guy, this young kid, that what I needed was a spiritual awakening. That's what happens at the Grateful Dead concerts, right? I mean, in the parking lot. The parking lot's the good place. Going inside is for amateurs. The parking lot's the magic. I had what I thought was a long list of problems when I got here. I had to get off of probation, and I had to, get out of mama's house. It's tough to make moves on a woman when you're at mama's. And I didn't have a car, so that's even tougher, right? Like, hey, sweetheart, you want to pick me up, and we'll go to your place, right? Like that doesn't do very well, for a young 19, 20-year-old guy in recovery. If I could just fix those problems, I'll be okay. As our book talks about, I think it's 63 or maybe it's 61, if I could just wrest satisfaction out of this world, then I'll be okay. And I think that's a very natural, that's a really natural thing for our young friends in recovery, And so I went out to kind of conquer this world. My first sponsor taking me through the steps. He's like, all right, step 2, came to believe. Do you believe? I'm like, yeah, I believe. He's like, all right, let's go on. I swear to you, right? Like, and if we read We Agnostics in a meeting, I kind of half read it. Because I believe in God, so why are we reading this chapter? We might as well be reading To the Wives. I mean, I didn't really read, like study read, try to understand We Agnostics until many years into recovery. Until after a crash and burn second surrender at 19 years of sobriety that found me at 3 o'clock in the morning crying like a schoolgirl on my kitchen floor because I just ruined my life, stone cold sober, self-will and riot, thinking rifle or shotgun. Those are my best 2 things that on self I can come up with. And I found a new level of surrender that I had never found before. My first, I'm going to bounce around a lot and talking about 2 and 3, but that's when I found We Agnostics for the first time, because lack of power was my dilemma, without a doubt. And my first kind of attempt at the third, so that was my second step. My first attempt at the third step was kind of like, God, you handle the alcohol and the drugs and the police and the courts, and I will handle the money and the women. It seems to be a good allocation of responsibilities because it... Lack of power is not my dilemma. I don't... Try staying focused every 5 minutes when you nearly get electrocuted. It's not easy. These 12 steps are divinely designed by God to remove what's blocking us from Him. That's been my experience. I didn't make that up. It's also written in our book, conveniently. But, that, like I said, that seemed to be a really good type of division of responsibilities. And because what was blocking me in this third step early in sobriety was, if I really turn my will and my life over to the care of God, I mean really, really, really turn my, not just like kind of, or 85% or 95%. I was like, because I believe what you said when you said half measures will avail you nothing. I saw the carnage. I saw my friends drink and die, and I see all that. So, all right. So I kind of negotiate that. So half, that's 50%. That's no good. So how about 95%? Because I know if I really go all in, put all my chips in for you poker players, if I go all in on this God deal, I clearly won't get what I want. And if I don't get what I want, I cannot be happy. And I didn't know this, but I had happiness and pleasure completely confused. I see some heads nods, but what I learned even a little bit later on, much later on, to really recent years, is that happiness isn't even the goal. That's a byproduct of trying to live by some spiritual principles. Happiness will come in your life and it will also go in your life. But the real goal for me today, standing here 34 years sober, is just peace. I just want peace in my life. I want to be able to look at you in the eye. I want to be able to experience the love that you have for me without giving up the alligator arms. I want to live a transparent life. The greatest gift from my sponsor is transparency. It's not his incredible interpretation of what Bill really meant on page 44, right? I mean, I appreciate that, but it's his. He loves me enough to be transparent, and I'm kind of going backwards a little bit. But early in sobriety, what was blocking me on this second step thing was this idea of just being kind of brief about, I believe, so let's move on. And our book does say that, that's all you need. Congratulations. If you believe there's a power out there to help you, awesome. Let's get going with the work. But in hindsight, what was blocking me is these old ideas that I have about God. I've come to since read our chapter, We Agnostics, and if you read it, you'll see 7 times where it uses the word prejudice, of getting rid of these prejudices. This is how ignorant I was in early sobriety. I remember reading that with my sponsor, Charles. Charles was my sponsor for about 10 years. I loved this man. He saved my life, and I didn't even know it. He was, we were complete opposites. He was almost a dinosaur. He was 50 when we met. And he was short, he's African-American, very well educated, had a lot of money. So we are exact opposites, right? He's old, I'm young. He's black, I'm white. He's retired. He's successful in every way that you can imagine. And this dude just saved my life. He saved my life. I'll never forget it. As I told you, I had about, I'll give you a little example of myself for Run Riot, my lack of third step in early sobriety. If you remember in 1990, the first Gulf War broke out. And I could not, my life was as manageable as the day I got here 18, 19 months later, right? I'm 20 months or sober or something like that. My life is just a mess. I can't keep it together. I can't even I'm still under mama's roof. And I can't keep a car that they gave me on the road, I'm making whatever, $400 a week and I'm spending $500, right? Like my life is a mess. And so I had an idea. This first Gulf War broke out, and my grandfather was a 2-star admiral in the Navy, went to the Naval Academy. His sons went to the Naval Academy. And I'm laying in bed one night, and I said, I should join the Navy. God was speaking to me that night. And so I went and joined the Navy, and then I went and asked my sponsor if it was a good idea. And so what happens, I don't know what happens now, but then, and if you remember, that war lasted 7 days. And so by the time they shipped me out to, I think it's called MEPS, I think that's what it's called, and then shipped me to San Diego for boot camp, the war was over. Visions of being a war hero were long over. And I don't have the courage anywhere near enough to be a war hero. But so they shave your head and they send all your stuff home. And they march you for 48 hours. They're starting to this break you down process. And they bring you in a room with 1,000 recruits as big as this room. And they make everybody sit Indian style for a long, long time. And everyone is nodding off, literally drooling on their lap. That's how tired we are. 48 hours, no sleep. And then this officer comes in and makes a bunch of noise, and he says, today is the moment of truth day. And I know right now there's a problem. And he says, if you've lied to the United States Navy, we'll find out, and we're going to give you a dishonorable discharge. It will stay with you for the rest of your life. That's not exactly how he put it, but that's close. He said, but if you're honest with us today, we will let you go with a general discharge. He said, if you've lied about your drug use, go into this corner. If you've lied about being arrested, go into this corner. If you lied about psychiatric care, go into this corner. If you lied about being incarcerated, go into that, something else, go into this corner. Well, now I got a question. It's true, I swear to you. And You don't have to have been through the Navy to know questions don't go well at boot camp. But this guy was so surprised. I can still see the look on his face. He was like, no, I bet you nobody ever asked a question during that process. And so he says, he was so dumbfounded. He says, "What is it, son?" And I said, "Well, where do you go if you've lied about all four?" And he said, "You come with me." So of my own willpower, running on my power, on full self-will, I can serve our military for 48 hours. For those of you in the back, Keith said, "Thank you for your service." And I'll tell you how toxic, insane I was. So I got home from that, and the first woman that would pay attention to me, I got married, and that's a whole story. I don't have all that time. But so I got married to this woman, hostage. But I got married, and I asked my sponsor. I said, "Hey, because officially it was 16 days when you add in the time in the brig and the marching time, it's 16 days. It's 8 times 2 days." And so I said to my sponsor, I said, "Do you think I could get a VA loan for a house?" I mean, I don't know how that man loved me. I mean, it was nearly impossible. I started telling you the story of how that guy saved my life, and I am going to get back to 2 and 3 a little bit more. So I got home from the Navy, and I am the loser's loser. Once again, they've made it clear, you are not welcome here, which was a theme in my life. And my mother dropped me off at this meeting, and you typically, you show up at an AA club, you get a ride home, and I was really, really dumbfounded because I hadn't taken our steps. I'd done what I thought was some step work and treatment, but my whole spiritual conditioning was based on the quality of the meeting. If the meeting was great, I was doing pretty good. But if the meeting sucked, my day sucked. And so I remember walking to this meeting, I'm like, "God, man, you got to do something here. This is not working for me." I mean, I wasn't doing any work, but this is not working for me. And there was this group of people that after the meeting, and Charles was one of them, there's about a dozen of them, that would huddle up over here, and they would have these in-depth conversations about, do we go to Bob's Big Boy or the IHOP or Denny's? But these people had something, I didn't know what it was, but they had this glow about them, this love about them. Again, they looked at each other in the eye. When they came upon each other, they didn't look at their shoes. I'm a shoe looker, and they hugged each other. Not the AA, like, "I'm going to beat you on your back till it hurts" thing. Like, they embraced each other. They told you, and the men cried and the women cried. They had something that I did not have. I'm 20 months sober, something like that, dry as a forest fire. And I wanted to go so bad to Bob's Big Boy or Denny's. And I went, and I went, some of you know that's big deal stuff when you finally get, and I'm standing over there and I'm pretending to like clean up. I'm not really going to do any service, but I'm just pretending to like straighten chairs and maybe get an ashtray. If you missed the smoking days of AA, I'm sorry. And I sent them telepathic messages to invite me because I was so afraid to ask. No, I'm serious. Because if they had said no that night, it's certainly a wrap. I'm done for. But they didn't receive these telepathic messages, and so I said, "Man, I'm out of here." And I left this AA club, and I mildly slammed the door, enough to not be invited back, but enough where they would notice, "Oh, John left." And I started walking home, which was a really bad idea because it was 7 miles to my mother's place. And as I got near the end of the road, it was Rockville Metro Club back when it was on Rothgeb Drive. I forgot what state I was in. I'm in Maryland. You guys know that club. Rockville Metro on Rothgeb Drive. And if you went left at the light, it was kind of, you were going nowhereville. Everybody else went to the right. And so as I approached that corner, I slowed my roll a little bit to give people a chance to reconsider. And lo and behold, Charles pulls up, and Rick is in the car, who bothers me a lot. And Rick rolls down the window, and Charles leans over and says, "Hey, man, do you want to go to Bob's Big Boy with us?" And I was too afraid to give him my usual sarcasm or to say no. And I was too afraid to say, "Thank God my rescue boat is finally here." And I just said, "Man, I don't have any money." And he said, "Well, seeing that you're walking, your financial position really wasn't in question." And, that was the Rockville Metro Club version of the California, "Get in the car, dummy," right? I mean, I don't know exactly what he said, but he looked at me with a look I hadn't seen, because these old guys, man, I'd come into the meeting 5 minutes late, leave 5 minutes early. We had halftime in our meetings. I'd go smoke 7 cigarettes. I'm flirting with the girls. I'm eating all the cookies. I mean, I am the worst AA member. If I threw my hand up, everybody did this. I mean, but, if I ever cornered one of them and said, "Hey, man, I need some help," they were all like, "Oh, okay." They were always ready to put the hand out, right? I mean, I was not a high-value draft pick when I got here, I'm telling you. I had no willingness. I had just enough willingness to do just enough to not die. And, I get thrown out of the Navy. I come back. I get married. She gets rid of me. She left on a Monday, and my wife, Renee, and I went on a date on Wednesday. And Friday, her and Brenda and the crib moved in. And, we started this AA journey together and that propelled me to do some step work. My first, fourth, and fifth step was more shallow and cowardly than searching and fearless. And I just want to tell you all that to get you. So I got to this second surrender. I'm 19 years in my 19th year of sobriety, and I very slowly got off our path, and just made a mess of my life, stone cold sober. Everything that I valued about my sobriety, I traded in except my sobriety date. I mean, just to give you a brief overview, in about a 1 year period of time, the IRS had garnished my checking account, 3 years sober. I got arrested in sobriety for not paying my speeding tickets. This business I had went bankrupt. I went personally bankrupt. The cars were being repossessed. My home was in foreclosure. And to top that all off, I traded in what I valued most, which was my fidelity to my wife. I violated our wedding vows. And it broke her, and it broke me in a way, and it forced me to a surrender that I had never surrendered to before. And so that takes you back to that kitchen floor at 3 o'clock in the morning. I said the greatest prayer I've ever said the first 19 years and in the last 15 years. And that was, "God, fix me or kill me, just do one of them quick. I will do anything, absolutely anything." And God sent me a little bank shot, like we all know God's little bank shots, and introduced me to a guy that loved our book. And I called this guy finally. And I want to point this out. I think the most important part of our third step, I think it's the top of 64. It says, "Though our decision was vital and crucial, it'll have little permanent effect," or maybe it says could have little permanent effect, "unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us." And so I made this incredible surrender on my kitchen floor. And some time goes by and nothing gets better. I'm just as suicidal. I'm borrowing a car to drive to a concern similar to one I once owned. Anybody? And I'm dying. Every day I'm thinking, man, I still got my life insurance policy, right? When you're 30-something, they're cheap. I got $1 million on me. I could just put this in the poll real quick and all this. Stone cold sober. And I didn't. And I finally called this guy. And I like making that distinction because surrender in and of itself does not bring transformation. It's just the requirement for transformation. And so I called this clown 1,000 miles away. And I said, hey, man, I heard you talking about the steps, and you talked about a 4-step in a way that I hadn't really heard about, the big book. And I'm like, hey, man, will you do the 4-step? Well, this is the first thing that happened. I said, hey, man, I introduced myself. I said, I've heard you talk on the 4-step, and I've never done it like that. Will you take me through the 4-step? And he said, well, this was early in the morning. He said, I don't know about the God of your understanding, but I just got off my knees, and I was asking God to send me somebody to help today, and I guess you're it. I didn't know he said that prayer every day. But that particular day, I was the anointed one. And but I tell you all that to say, because I like making fun of myself, but this is the important part. He said, well, I'm not going to do the 4-step with you. And I thought, man, I thought I just told you what the problem was. I gave you a pretty good solution. Come on, sponsor, let's go fix this, I don't know if you sponsor any guys that like to tell you what the solution is, but he said, if you're willing to open our book and follow the instructions and read when it says, read and pray and make a list and consider and make things right, if you do that, I'll do it with you. He said, because you don't stay sober 19 years by accident, you've done something right, but maybe you've missed something. Let's go see if we can find out what it is. And I said, I'm all in, brother. And I got my big book out of the closet, and it was like, and like a bat flew out of it, And he gave me that task. He said, read the doctor's opinion, read the first 3 chapters, see if you're in the right spot, and like, I swore I had like a 5th edition because like they had put all this new stuff in there. Like, and it was, and when he first told me that, I was like, I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, man, I've been sober a long time. I know the first step, But the difference for me in understanding alcoholism and knowing I can't drink are night and day, right? Because at the top of 44 in We Agnostics, it says, we hope we've, made the difference in the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. We hope we've made that pretty clear to you, right? It's like, I read that with a new guy, or he reads it, we meet again, and I say, are you in here? And if you're not, okay, congratulations. But if you're not sure, let me show you where I'm in here. Let me show you how I knew. But if you really think you're not here, man, spike the football and get out. There's nothing wrong with that. And then it goes to tell us there's 2 options, right? See, just knowing you're an alcoholic and you can't drink doesn't get you to this point of truth, of accepting that you got 2 choices, right? To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, How about option number 3? Well, what else you got? And that was no longer my position because I understood what 90% meant, 95% is treading water. 99% is treading water. And I'm not saying we can surrender perfectly. Because I'm sure today at some point I exerted self-will, It may have been that triple mocha latte, that I'm not supposed to have with 17 shots of espresso, right? Like somehow I exerted self today. We don't surrender perfectly. But this intent of wanting to surrender, this intent, is totally different than knowing, hey, I'm still going to drive the bus here a little bit. And the magic, and thank God he didn't just take me to the 4-step and say, let's go fix the little crisis of the day. Because I don't know about you, I've had thousands of crises in Alcoholics Anonymous. And a few have actually happened. Like, there's a lot going on up in here. But what happened in that We Agnostics was this idea that I had to get rid of these prejudices. Bill says it 7 times, right? Get your big book out and chase some themes. These old ideas I had about God were completely blocking me. If I'm working with a new guy and he says, man, I'm having a really difficult time with the 3rd step, I can't turn this over or whatever, that's not a 3rd step problem. That's a 2nd step problem. Your conception isn't big enough to turn it over to. And these conceptions that I had carried in, the 2nd step and 3rd step and through all my steps, were faulty. It was like putting a AAA battery into a AA remote. Why doesn't this work? And I'm going to share with you some of these old conceptions. I had this idea that God was not big enough. I'm too broken to fix. I mean, what a silly little arrogant thing, right? He can create this entire universe, because I believe that, right? I believe in God, but like, oh no, I'm too messed up. Idiot, right? I had this idea, and this was the two big ones that were blocking me, was this idea that God was keeping score. Because I don't know about you, I'm a foxhole guy, right? At 14 years old, when I get that first DUI in Ocean City, Maryland, and the blue lights are there, you know what I said. God, get me out of this, and I'll never do it again, right? And I got out of that. And an hour later, I'm on the beach, and I'm blitzed out of my mind. You know, I made a zillion promises to God, a million deals with God, and I broke every single one of them. And not to mention all of my character defects and all my sins, if you will. All of the things that that violate our spiritual principles, right? I knew God was keeping score. So why am I going to enter this game in the fourth quarter with 2 minutes left, down by 35? No thanks, right? And the other one was this idea about forgiveness. You know, when I went through this work with my sponsor at 19 years, we talked a lot about this conception idea. And he took me through the book where Ebby says to Bill, you know, why don't you just choose your own conception? And it says it in We Agnostics a couple times, and it later says it in working with others, you know, that we get to choose our own conception. Now, the book doesn't say write it down, but he says, you're not the brightest guy, so let's write this down. And if it changes, great. You know, so let's come up with a conception that you can live with, because in the third step, you're about to enter this contract. So this is not an idea of what do I think God is today. It's not what I believe. Let's come up with a conception. What do I need God to be if I'm going to go on with the rest of these steps? And just do a scientific experiment. We're going to write these 6 or 7 things down, and let's see if he is these things, and that will develop the relationship. As I think I said at the beginning, right? You know, Bill says in our personal stories, each man tells us in his own way how he developed his relationship with God, not how he came up with the right belief system. When I was 10 years sober, I converted to Catholicism, and on that quest, right? Let me figure this God thing out, because my power is not working, you know. And I loved it, and it's, you know, I loved that whole time in my life. And but this is kind of a synopsis of what my third step was at the time. When you become a Catholic, you choose a saint that you want to emulate, and the saint that I chose was Saint Augustine. Not because he was a drunk or a womanizer, but I read this prayer that he had, and it was, God, please keep me pure, just not right now. That's the way. Like, I wanted to be one of God's guys. I wanted to have that power. I wanted to have that glow, but I just didn't have all of the willingness, you know. So I go back. So my sponsor says, you know, come up with this conception, and let's go through the rest, and let's just see if they're true. If these conceptions aren't true, we'll throw it away. But if they are true, it'll build this relationship. He said, let me explain it to you this way. You know, when you're new in sobriety and you meet a girl and you start dating, you hope she's faithful. You hope she's honest, right? And you're just going to act as if these things are true. And you're going to go on the dating process. And as she affirms those things, it's going to grow the relationship. And if she doesn't, you find a new one and you throw those things out, right? Your conception of what this woman is. And so you're doing the same thing with this God. Let's see how this conception plays out. And when I went over to my list to him, the biggest thing was I needed a God that was going to be forgiving, because I made a mess of my life. And I didn't have the excuse of being under the influence, right? The only thing I was under the influence of was John's self-will. So we're going over this second step conception list. And I say forgiving. He says, yeah, I get that. But how about a God that's eager to forgive? And that was a lot different for me, because I always thought forgiveness was earned. It was merit-based. And I could never stop doing whatever I was doing long enough to earn that forgiveness, because I'm operating on John's power, right? And it makes sense with what our book says, a God that's eager to forgive. It says, I think our greatest promise after the 12th step is that God does not make hard terms on those who seek him. Without a doubt. I mean, if he did, would any of us be sitting here? Right? He needs knuckleheads like us. There's no doubt. There's no doubt he needs us. And so we went over this list, and he said, all right, let's just see if these things are true. You know, and when I do this with a guys, a lot of times I get this, well, I believe 2,000 years ago. No. That's not what we're talking about. What do you want God to be to enter this contract? Because that's what the third step is. We get to put a little fine print in there. I'm going to try to be one of God's guys, but this is what I'm hoping that he is. This is what I need him to be if I'm going to turn all of it in. And we said that third step prayer together. He lived in Nashville, and I lived here, and we were doing this step work over the phone and stuff. And he said, okay, we're going to take the third step prayer. And we were having this conversation about two and stuff, and I'm driving down Claire Barton Parkway. You guys know where that is, coming out of D.C., headed north. And I said, well, I'm driving the car. He said, well, pull over. And I said, all right. You know, and there's a bunch of little, where the C&O canal is, there's a bunch of little pump stations or whatever. And so I pull over, and he's like, well, get on your knees. And I'm like, well, I'm in the car. He's like, get out of the car, you know. And so there I am, you know, on the side of my car, you know. Well, somebody else's car, but, you know, and we say this prayer, and when we're finished, he says, okay, the rest of your life is none of your business. That's what the third step meant, you know. And I believe that to be true. I believe the rest of my life is none of my business, you know. And the contract in that third step that Bill talks about is really not that difficult, right? I mean, it's quite a promise, right? He is the parent. He is the father. I think Bill used the word. You know, he is the director. We're going to be his agents. That sounds pretty good to me, you know. And when I can do that on a moment-by-moment basis, I get to experience what God wanted me for all along, you know. All this, as I said earlier, all of this work is designed to remove this blockage. And then for me, in that third step, the blockage was this idea that somehow I can manage just a little bit. You know, there's this. I remember in early sobriety, there was this guy at the Rockville Metro Club that used to tell the story. He said, you know, there's this guy that I'm sure a lot of you have heard. There's this old man that lives out in the woods in a cabin, and he hears on the radio, there is a massive flood coming. If you can hear my voice, you're in a flood zone. Get out of there. Your life is in danger. He's like, I got this. God's going to take care of me. And he sees the creek rising, and this park ranger comes by in a Jeep, says the same warning. He says, God's going to take care of me. All right, man. Same thing, water's rising. Park ranger comes by in a little boat. Get in the boat, man. Your life's, boom. Same response. God's going to take care of me. Park ranger leaves. The flood's coming. It's on the first floor of the house. He gets on the roof of the house. Helicopter comes by with the ladder. Grab the ladder. No, God's going to take care of me. And he dies. No big shocker to you guys. And he gets up there and says, God, what? I thought you were going to take care of me. He says, brother, I sent you a radio announcement, a Jeep, a boat, and a helicopter, right? Like, and that's what the rest of these steps are, right? This decision in and of itself, this surrender, is no good. There's one part of this that I really love that I couldn't quite grasp. You know, this part in after the ABCs, you know, it says just what do we do and what do we mean by that? Like that was always kind of what does this turn this wheel over look like? You know, how do I not grab the steering wheel or the controls? And there's some really clear instructions in here. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. And it just doesn't say like in some of areas of our life. My friend Harold, I've done a number of retreats as a participant with him, and I remember him asking us, you know, what % of your finances have you turned over to God? What % of your intimate life have you turned over to God? You know, what % of your work life, right? Like, those are big questions. But there are some musts involved in here. You know, a lot of people say, well, there's no must in AA. And there are not. If you want to be a member here, there are no musts. We are so glad you're here. You're welcome here. But what we have found, the collective we of Alcoholics Anonymous, that there are things that we must do if we're going to stay sober long term. And here's a couple of them. Above everything else, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. And when he says we had to, that's a shorter word for must. We had to have God's help. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. And if we can do those things, then we get this new employer. And a little bit later on 63, after the prayer, it says, if we can express this without reservation. And that was tough for me. Not at my second surrender at 19 years. And then what I love about this, I used to, what I like about the third step prayer in the book is it says, the wording, of course, was quite optional. And for the first many years in sobriety, someone taught me when I first got here, man, say the third step prayer every morning, ask God to keep you sober, and if you stay sober at the end of the night, say thank you. That's your prayer life. All right, pretty good. And so I would do that, and I stayed sober, physically sober. And I would say the third step prayer so fast, I had no idea what I was saying. It's just like when we say the Lord's Prayer at the end of your meeting. Who's praying? I don't know. And who's praying that entire prayer? I'm guilty of that. I'll check in and out of that prayer while we're saying it. Especially that part about the trespassers. And so one of the things that I like to do with the men that I sponsor, who are going through this a second time, when we get to this third step prayer, they're all ready. We got our books out, we're knee to knee, or, we're sitting at a coffee table, and they're ready to throw up this third step prayer again out of memory. A lot of them like to show off, they close their book. I'm ready, And I say, all right, well, let's not say the third step prayer. Let's hear your surrender prayer. The wording was, of course, quite optional, as long as I'm wording it without reservation, And that's how I try to keep my prayer life today is in the morning I'm still surrendering, and in the night I'm still saying thanks. I do my best to never ask for anything in the evening. My day is done. I believe what our book says about really not asking for anything except in usefulness to others. But in the third step, I try to surrender everything. And I try to do it in detail. I need the reminders. God, this business is yours. These finances is yours. This family is yours. My wife is yours. Everything is yours. And living that way, when my wife and I were going, and this will be my second to last thing. What'd you say? I have an hour left? Is that what you said? Oh, I was hoping you said that. When we were going through the second surrender together, we just made this decision that everything was going to be God's. Because, the future could not be explained. The picture could not be painted how this was going to turn out, what we would say good, right? You couldn't draw that map. How is this going to work out, right? And for me, it was a number of reasons, one of which was that, her first marriage had ended for the very same reason. And I could not see how this would turn out for the good. I knew, and that's always dangerous when an alcoholic says that, right? It's probably not true. And it wasn't true. I knew that she was going to beat me with this for the rest of my life. I was going to be punished. But I didn't know that she had been through our book. I knew she had been through our book, but I didn't know the depth and weight of the transformation that she had, that she did not bring this into our current marriage. And I was wrong about that. But we surrendered at this depth and weight together. We just said, everything is yours, God. I couldn't pay the mortgage. We went 2 years without paying the mortgage. And we were able to stay in that house. And we just said, when God's ready to take it, he's going to take it, right? We're going to do our best. And we try to negotiate and all this stuff and get a new loan. I don't have time to tell that story, but that everything was God's. And you got to be careful. When you say that out loud, God, everything is yours, watch out, right? Your house will fill with newcomers. Your house will fill with people you do not want there. My wife and I always had this pact that her mother, at the end of her life, would not come to our house. We both knew, it wasn't even my rule, it was my wife's rule. That woman was crazy. And the transformation that I want to briefly share with you is that when the time came, the last 2 months of her life, she said, I want to bring my mom home to die in our home. And I said, absolutely. It was not a year before, the response would have been, my house? I just knew it was God's house, and that's what they all wanted. And we had this beautiful time together. And I was able to make peace with that woman. She made peace with me. And I love this visualization when I'm meditating. I like to talk about this a lot when I talk. I've got this umbilical cord to God, right? I believe what Chuck C. used to say, that we cannot be separated. We can feel like we're separated. We can seem like we're separated, but I don't think I can be. I can run and that's where the power flow comes through, right? This golden, platinum, beautiful umbilical cord. And I can run in a circle and tie it in a knot and slow down the flow. I can run 1,000 yards away and stretch that bandwidth so it's almost like dial-up. Remember the old dial-up computers? That's how I'm hearing God's messages. We used to log on to AOL. Remember, it took like 7 minutes to log on, trying to get one email. But the reason why I love that visualization is when my wife was having our second child, Savannah, she was in the delivery room in the little cubby thing, and she's all monitored up, stickers everywhere and monitoring the baby's heartbeat. And the baby's heartbeat stopped. And things get exciting in the delivery room when that happens. They're getting ready to do a crash C-section, doctor, nurses, everyone, tables, scalpels, all this stuff. I'm standing in the corner, like a deer in the headlights. And this old school nurse comes in. This could never happen today. This old school nurse comes in, who was the charge nurse. She gave him a little bit of her backside. She's like, "Hold on, doc, get out of the way." And she said, "Honey, roll over on all fours. Put your arm over there. Put your leg over there." And in like 15 seconds, 30 seconds, the baby's heartbeat came back. And born, healthy, beautiful. She's a lawyer down now in Nashville. I'm sorry, now we didn't need another lawyer, but she's an awesome lawyer. The cool thing is she loves serving. Her clients are us. She's a criminal defense attorney. And she is. She calls me all the time. She's like, "Do you know of a rehab in Oklahoma that I can send this guy to?" I'm like, "Hold on a minute." And so the baby's born perfect. And the next day they go to discharge her, and I say to this nurse, what in the hell happened in there? And she said, sometimes right before the baby comes out, they get so scared, they squeeze their own umbilical cord so hard, they stop their own blood flow. And that is exactly what I do with this umbilical cord to me to God. And that's why each one of these steps do is release one of these fingers from this vice grip that I got. That's why I have to have a sponsor 34 years sober. That's why I got to sponsor a bunch of men, go to their prison. So I have this, and I got to be transparent with all these people in my life so they can look down, and when I go to them and say, "God, what's going on in my life? I'm having all these problems." They can look down and say, "John, you're squeezing." I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love you guys. I love my life. Thank you. Thanks.